So I want to start, it's going to be a heavy day today, but I wanted to start with a moment of lightness. So 3 people walk into a bar, a health freedom activist, a vaccinologist, and Tony Fauci. And the bartender says, "What do you want?" And the activist says, "I'll order what I want." The vaccinologist says, "I will trust and follow the science." And Tony Fauci says, "Stop right there. We're closing down the bar unless you're triple jabbed, wearing 2 masks, and sitting 6 feet from the peanuts." And I don't want to trivialize COVID at all. I want to talk about COVID. But it was the absurdity of the things that we were asked to follow. And that is the essence of tyranny. Getting people to follow things that they know in their heart of hearts are absolutely absurd. So during COVID, and COVID is what brought us here, right? I'm one of the people who was, like Dell, here long before COVID, but COVID is what has brought this movement together to make America healthy. And at the heart of the Make America Healthy Again movement are the people who were injured by vaccines and who said, we can't continue this program. So what were some of the absurdities during COVID? Like we said, the masks, the shots, the tests, the forced shutdowns, the school closures, the lockdowns in your home, the experimental toxic injections, the closing of houses of worship. Everything about it was a fiasco. And that's why Children's Health Defense and many other groups, Brownstone, who's here, Health Freedom Defense Fund, we are all joined together in something called COVID justice, because there has not been the reckoning that Dell just spoke about. We must have a reckoning that at a minimum says that they won't do this again. They won't abrogate the Constitution and everything that we hold dear. So I've got some flyers here. You can sign a petition for a Senate resolution that they won't do this again, that they won't play the pandemic card to the detriment of the whole country and truly of the world. But what happened during COVID was only slightly more insane than what has been the childhood vaccine program for almost 100 years. And I want to focus on the fact that this conflict between medical freedom and medical coercion goes back more than 100 years. It's a couple hundred years old, but it's a fundamental conflict that we must resolve now in favor of medical freedom or forever be truly slaves to medical tyranny. So I want to quote from a Court of Appeals decision from Judge Benjamin Cardozo from 1914, where he said in a ruling about a surgery that was performed on a woman without her informed consent, he wrote, "Every human being of adult years and sound mind has a right to determine what shall be done with his own body." And we have to transfer that also to women and to children. That's 1914. That's the law from 1914, and it is often looked at as one of the first very clear formulations about prior free and informed consent in a medical context. And I should say that decision says that the doctor should be liable for assault for having done something without that woman's consent. 1947, the world witnessed medical atrocities among Nazi doctors. In the concentration camps, they used human beings as experimental subjects. So American doctors and American lawyers formulated the Nuremberg Code. And in 1947, the first sentence of the first principle is the voluntary consent of the human subject is absolutely essential. And I love in that sentence, it's absolute. There's no black and white here. It's absolute. You have to have voluntary consent. And since Nuremberg, this principle has extended to every dimension of medicine. That is the hallmark of ethical modern medicine. So to the extent that there is any medical coercion anywhere in the world, it is clearly a violation of Nuremberg. And I just want to read a little bit more the second sentence of the Nuremberg Code. It means that the person involved should have legal capacity to give consent, should be so situated as to be able to exercise free power of choice without the intervention of any element of force, fraud, deceit, duress, overreaching, or other ulterior form of constraint or coercion. COVID and the childhood vaccine program throw all of that out the window. That was to end the possibility for medical atrocities. And what we're talking about, if we are indeed, as I know we are, harming 1.4 million children a year, that is a medical atrocity. So this has been amplified in the Belmont Report, the Oviedo Declaration, the Declaration of Helsinki, the Common Rule, the UNESCO Declaration on Human Rights and Bioethics, and yet medical coercion persists. And I think you can encapsulate the idea of informed consent from the women's movement. My body, my choice. And that extends to my body or my children's bodies, the parent's choice. So the only place that this sort of exception to informed consent has existed is around infectious disease. And it's been the childhood vaccine schedule to prevent infectious disease and this idea that we have to prevent these pandemics. And it's absolutely common knowledge that the COVID shots did not stop transmission or infection. So I think we've come to a point now where this has to get resolved. It was too fundamental and global an issue with COVID that it can remain sort of in the shadows. But I think what we saw in the 1970s is big industry understands that chronic disease is profitable and it has many side benefits in terms of controlling populations. It is a full-time job to care for someone with a chronic disease. And I think the way that this happened was through Congress. I think the 1980 Bayh-Dole Act basically making government scientists captured by industry, they can get royalties up to $150,000, they can pass it on to their heirs. The 96 National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act that Dell mentioned, which basically bought liability protection for industry and for healthcare providers. And then the 2005 Public Readiness and Emergency Preparedness Act that basically said anybody involved with pandemics, the government, the planning, the government planners, the healthcare people, the manufacturers, they're all free. And that was globalized by something called the COVAX facility. This is literally an attempt to buy the world the kind of liability protection or immunity that is what we should have. We should have immunity, not industry. So I think medical coercion, the good news is it's losing. The COVID vaccine uptake today is 7.6%. That's from 5 days ago. The hepatitis B uptake among babies is now down 10%. Flu vaccine uptake is down. And people are voting with their feet. Tens of thousands of people have left New York, California, Maine, Connecticut to be in states where they can choose not to vaccinate their children because there is at least a religious exemption so that they can exercise their faith and not vaccinate children with products they believe to be harmful to their children. The reality is that vaccines are unsafe and ineffective and they cost lives, the exact inversion of the slogans that we hear. And people today will be telling you more about the body of science that shows this, that is causing massive harm, that it's dysregulating the immune system, and it's causing a variety of syndromes and diseases. And this is why the vaccine manufacturers, starting in the 1970s, demanded this liability protection. That was after the swine flu disaster of 1976. This is not a new issue. You don't ask for liability protection for a perfectly safe product. That's nonsensical. You ask for liability protection as an industry when you know that your product is unsafe and ineffective for many. So I think we should have a new slogan, no liability, no dice. And unfortunately, that even extends beyond the vaccine world. It extends to other areas where big industry is basically setting itself up against individuals. And yet under our Constitution, we're all created equal. And so this is, in my view, really an un-American tendency for industry to get some kind of a liability shield. So why is it so important in this vaccine space? Because vaccines actually touch on, in my view, the most fundamental rights we have as human beings. It touches on bodily autonomy. It touches on freedom of conscience. It touches on parental rights. And it touches on the right to informed consent and refusal for medical interventions. So I think it's pretty basic. How could you possibly assert rights to property or to due process or to equal protection if you don't have rights over your own body? It doesn't get more fundamental than this. And I'm very happy to say that our colleagues at Brownstone Health Freedom Defense Fund just did a poll the end of February. 91% of Americans support informed consent. 88% support the right to refuse medical treatment. 87% medical choice is a human right. Overwhelming majorities of our citizens support medical freedom. So I'm going to conclude with, what's attributed to Gandhi, but it was apparently a labor organizer, really, who said, first they ignore you, then they ridicule you, then they fight you, and then you win. So we're not being ignored anymore. We're no longer being ridiculed all the time. We're certainly being fought. I think the Atlantic article against Dell just shows that, and we're fighting back. And we're really now I think, within sight of that final stage when we win. States are putting in place medical freedom laws. There's bills in Congress that Children's Health Defense is supporting, the GRACE Act from Representative Stubbe, the right for the right to religious exemptions, the End the Vaccine Carve-Out by Representative Gosar, ending liability protection, and Tom Massey's bill to repeal the PrEP Act. These are great bills, but it's not only in Congress. I think there's a discussion about these issues in the administration, in HHS, in the Department of Justice. There are cases moving towards the Supreme Court from many different corners that are going to bring to a head this conflict and create this legal reckoning. We have got to, as a society, global, decide, is medical coercion okay, or do you have a right to decide what happens to your body? I say, you are friends in this audience. We are winning. As I've said before, during COVID, the truth is on our side, the ethics are on our side, the science is on our side, and the law is on our side. Let us win. Thank you very much.